Welcome to Poetry and Poets with SueAn Stradling-Collins, Director of the Apache County Library District. Today we're going to talk about the poet Billy Collins. New York Times declared him the most popular poet in America, and his popularity is still going, and he's easy to access, and he is a poet that's very people-friendly, I guess is what I'd say. He was born in New York in 1941. He is still living. In 2001 through 2003, he was the Poet Laureate of the United States. And in 2004 through 2006, he was the New York State Poet. During the pandemic, he has been reading poetry just about every day on Facebook. And so if you'd like to see him read his own poetry, go to Facebook and like his page, and you'll be able to hear him daily as he talks about poetry and reads his own poetry. When he was the Poet Laureate, most Poet Laureates have some sort of theme or something that they focus on while they are serving in that position. And Billy Collins put together a program called Poetry 180. Most school years have 180 days in them, and so he was focusing on high school students, and he wanted to do a 180 and have people turn back to poetry. So it was actually called Poetry 180, a turning back to poetry, so that 180 had two meanings to it. And he took and published in a book as well as on a website, which you can find easily. Put in Poetry 180, and you will find the 180 poems that he wanted high school students to read. There's a wonderful variety there, and so I recommend that you look those up. With that, let's read some of his poetry. I'm going to start with one that's called On Turning 10. The whole idea of it makes me feel like I'm coming down with something worse than any stomach ache or the headaches I get from reading in bad light. A kind of measles of the spirit, a mumps of the psyche, a disfiguring chickenpox of the soul. You tell me it is too early to be looking back, but that is because you have forgotten the perfect simplicity of being one, and the beautiful complexity introduced by two. But I can lie on my bed and remember every digit. At 4, I am an Arabian wizard. I could make myself invisible by drinking a glass of milk a certain way. At 7, I was a soldier. At 9, a prince. But now I am mostly at the window, watching the late afternoon light. Back then it never fell so solemnly against the side of my treehouse, and my bicycle never leaned against the garage as it does today. All the dark blue speed drained out of it. This is the beginning of sadness, I say to myself as I walk through the universe in my sneakers. It is time to say goodbye to my imaginary friends. Time to turn the first big number. It seems only yesterday I used to believe there was nothing under my skin but light. If you cut me, I would shine. But now, when I fall upon the sidewalks of life, I skin my knees, I bleed. Okay. He has taught at university for many, many years, and being a former teacher, this is one of my favorite poems of his. By the way, this reminds me, I was able to meet Billy Collins in 2005, and he signed this book for me, and so I have Billy Collins' signature inside my book. It was wonderful to hear him read his poetry in person, wonderful to talk to him. There was a long line, so I didn't get to talk much, but he had talked about Richard Brautigan being an influence of his, and so I spoke a few minutes with him about Richard Brautigan, and he was very gracious to talk to. This one's called Schoolsville. Glancing over my shoulder at the past, I realize the number of students I have taught is enough to populate a small town. I can see it nestled in a paper landscape, chalk dust flurrying down in winter, nights dark as a blackboard. The population ages, but never graduates. On hot afternoons, they sweat the final in the park, and when it's cold, they shiver around stoves, reading disorganized essays out loud. A bell rings on the hour, and everybody zigzags into the streets with their books. I forgot all their last names first, and their first names last, in alphabetical order. But the boy who always had his hand up is an alderman and owns the haberdashery. The girl who signed her papers in lipstick leans against the drugstore, smoking, brushing her hair like a machine. Their grades are sewn into their clothes like references to Hawthorne. The A's stroll along with other A's. The D's honk whenever they pass another D. All the creative writing students recline on the courthouse lawn and play the lute. Wherever they go, they form a big circle. Needless to say, I am the mayor. I live in the white colonial at Maple and Main. I rarely leave the house. The car deflates in the driveway. Vines twirl around the porch swing. Once in a while, a student knocks on the door with a term paper, 15 years late, or a question about Yeats, or double spacing. And sometimes one will appear in a window pane to watch me lecturing the wallpaper, quizzing the chandelier, reprimanding the air. It's one of my very favorite poems of his. Two more. His poems are quite long, and so I can only choose so many. He actually is quite humorous, and so, but you have to appreciate his humor, and you have to read quite a bit to see the humor in it. This one I think is quite humorous. It's called Questions About Angels. Of all the questions you might want to ask about angels, the only one you ever hear is how many can dance on the head of a pin. No curiosity about how they pass the eternal time besides circling the throne, chanting in Latin, or delivering a crust of bread to a hermit on earth, or guiding a boy and girl across a rickety wooden bridge. Do they fly through God's body and come out singing? Do they swing like children from the hinges of the spirit world, saying their names backwards and forwards? Do they sit alone in little gardens, changing colors? What about their sleeping habits, the fabric of their robes, their diet of unfiltered divine light? What goes on inside their luminous heads? Is there a wall these tall presences can look over and see hell? If an angel fell off a cloud, would he leave a hole in a river, and would the hole float along endlessly, filled with the silent letters of every angelic word? If an angel delivered the mail, would he arrive in a blinding rush of wings, or would he just assume the appearance of the regular mailman and whistle up the driveway, reading the postcards? No, the medieval theologians control the court. The only question you ever hear is about the little dance floor on the head of a pin, where halos are meant to converge and drift invisibly. It is designed to make us think in millions, billions, to make us run out of numbers and collapse into infinity. But perhaps the answer is simply one. One female angel dancing alone in her stocking feet, a small jazz combo working in the background. She sways like a branch in the wind, her beautiful eyes closed, and the tall, thin bassist leans over to glance at his watch because she has been dancing forever, and now it is very late, even for musicians. And then I'll end with one about older age called Forgetfulness. The name of the author is the first to go, followed obediently by the title, the plot, the heartbreaking conclusion, the entire novel, which suddenly becomes one you have never read, never even heard of. As if, one by one, the memories you used to harbor decided to retire to the southern hemisphere of the brain, to a little fishing village where there are no phones. Long ago you kissed the names of the 9 muses goodbye and watched the quadratic equation pack its bag. And even now, as you memorize the order of the planets, something else is slipping away. A state flower, perhaps, the address of an uncle, the capital of Paraguay. Whatever it is you are struggling to remember, it is not poised on the tip of your tongue, not even lurking in some obscure corner of your spleen. It is floated away down a dark mythological river whose name begins with an L, as far as you can recall. Well on your own way to oblivion, where you will join those who have even forgotten how to swim and how to ride a bicycle. No wonder you rise in the middle of the night to look up the date of a famous battle in a book on war. No wonder the moon in the window seems to have drifted out of a love poem that you used to know by heart. He's well worth the time, very accessible. Like I said, you can see him every day if you'd like. Poet Billy Collins, and hopefully he'll be with us a few more years and sharing more poetry. Thanks for joining us.